were gracious enough to talk about their adventure on the Anglesey Coast, and I've been super excited to hear about this. You hear a lot about whales, but I've never paddled there, so very excited to hear about your adventure. So take it away.
Awesome. Cool. Marianne, do you want to kick us off?
You can jump in first, Laura, if you want.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to thank everybody first for showing up. For me, 8 p.m. is a tall order, so the fact that y'all have made it this far, I'm very complimented. So this trip happened last year in October, mid-October, and we're excited to share with you a bit more about it. This isn't the full team. Wish we could have gotten more folks, strong-armed them, but we do have a strong contingent to share our stories. So I'll go ahead and head into the next slide to give you a little bit more of an introduction. Well, that was a smooth transition. So why whales? Some of you may know Kelly Marie Henry. She used to live and coach in the Bay Area for a long time. And she's not only a collaborator of mine, sea kayak coaching wise, but she's also one of my closest friends. And aside from kayaking, we also worked together for about 4 years at a luxury small group travel company. So we have those worlds that we kind of touched base in. And then she fell in love with an Englishman who lives in Wales, who's also a sea kayaking coach. Some of y'all may know, or have worked with at Paddle Golden Gate or other events. His name is Nick Cunliffe. And she moved to Wales for love and left the Bay Area, which, you know, was bittersweet because it's always hard to lose a friend, but also good to gain a friend in a great place that you want to visit. So after we worked together and she left the company we both worked for to start a coaching business with her husband, Nick. And so she and Nick started Flow State Adventures in early 2022. We've always been scheming how we could, you know, bring a fun group of Americans out to paddle since she moved there. And so this was our opportunity to do it, and we started planning it. And this trip was the result of that collaboration. So that's one way to say why Wales. Another reason why Wales is because it's kind of the mecca of sea kayaking. I don't think that was by design, it's kind of by happenstance. And as you see throughout our presentation, you'll kind of understand why it's become that. But I'm curious, who here has been to Wales before? I know there's a lot of backers who have. Feel free to chime in on the chat or raise your hand. No. Maybe Owen took a ferry there once. But Wales is technically, part of Britain. It's not part of England, but it's part of Britain. And it's definitely part of the British Isles, and an area that's really maintained a super strong identity, in addition to being this outdoor epicenter of the UK. It has mountains, it has where you have mountaineering and climbing and whitewater kayaking, in addition to sea kayaking and coasteering. And throughout our trip, we saw so many high schoolers and middle schoolers doing these outdoor activities that in the US, they seem kind of niche, but they're just kind of, part of their everyday PE class. Just swap basketball for sea kayaking or climbing over cliffs or over the ocean. So that's a little bit of a background. And to touch a little bit more, I'll speak to this later in the presentation, but the history of Wales is just super fascinating. And you think that you're going to be immersed in nature and kind of separate from that history of the place, but it's everywhere, even when you're paddling. And you'll see that throughout our presentation as well. So Marianne and Paul, do you think now's a good time to just show a little teaser of the Instagram video? Okay, so we're gonna punctuate the presentation with some videos. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can do this here. Bear with me. Okay, almost there. Can you guys see this screen? I'm gonna try and also optimize this. All right. Let me know if this looks choppy. Can you guys see it?
Yeah, it's playing back.
But no volume.
There's no volume?
Did you share your screen with share video?
Oh, yeah. Did I do something wrong?
When you share your screen, you have to share the source video, and there's two check boxes at the bottom of the share screen window.
Oh my gosh.
One for optimizing for video and one for the sound.
Thank you so much. All right.
Oh yeah.
Learn something new every day. Thank you, Jonathan. Okay. Let's take off. I'm gonna give you guys a preview because I think the music's pretty important because it is it's all in Welsh. It's a Welsh rock band, and they're based in Anglesey, and they sing about Anglesey. And I looked at the translation of the lyrics, and it's like getting drunk at night on a bar. And
Ti'n isio torri fewn i'r tenar, ti'n gofyn gen I geiniog sbar I sbario, I wario Dylygyd gyfrin a cholas Sy'n achosi'n halon ni'n ar y dadrau Pwyso ar y pilar di Sydd yn sefyll flaen y dafarn Ti'n llosgi yn y meddwl I A nid y cwrw sydd yn siarad Dwi isio chdi yn fwy na neb A does na neb isio fwy na chdi Heno yn yr Anglesey
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna go back to presenter mode. Oh no.
This
All right, guys.
is why I didn't want to do that.
I know. Thanks for bearing with me here. Okay, back on track. All right. Here we go. And here's just a little bit more like centering you and like the non-paddling like sense of place for whales. Paul, Marianne, do you want to chime in with this slide here?
Well, forget that cat's name, but he was quite a character. He lived in the drying room for the most part, and that was the warmest place in that building, and where we dried all our dry suit and all of our wet things every night so that we could start over again. He was cute, but the place we stayed at was, I think, was originally started or used by Nigel Dennis. Is that correct? Is that the right person? Or was it somebody else? I forget. it was some kayaker dude who had was a pretty prominent kayaker, and he's no longer part of that. I think he's moved, but they're still used as an outdoor kind of recreational facility. So they host trips for various people, kayakers, and including schools. And while we were there for the whole entire week, there was basically a middle school class that was part of it, and they were pretty rowdy. And they did kayaking and some rope stuff on the coast and whatnot. So we had a little unit there as well as some pods in the back, and it was very well situated. It was very close to one of our put-in locations by a beach. So I forget the name of it, but it was a really awesome place to be for the week. That's all I'll say.
Excellent. Cool. Yeah, and one thing I want to chime in on, and Anglesey Outdoors, the place where we stayed, it's kind of like a hostel that's designed mostly for sea kayakers too. So not only is it really well situated close to, like the Isle of Anglesey, it's close to the Holyhead, and the island in particular where it is Holy Island, but the town is Holyhead. A little confusing. That's just the tip of the iceberg for like confusing terms in Wales. But they have a really great bar and restaurant there, and the bar and restaurant's called the Paddler's Return. And so it was just so charming to be around a place where you're like, oh, I'm home, just 3,000 miles away. All right, I'm gonna go to the next slide unless there's anything you want to add, Marianne. All right. Awesome. And here's a little bit more of the scenes around Holy Island. So we went on a hike our first day, mostly to see Penryn Mawr and some of the coastline around the tide race of Penryn Mawr by land. And we, just as Paul was mentioning, we stumbled upon a group of high schoolers or middle schoolers that I'm not sure if you all can see. They're doing like a climbing / ropes course over the rocks and ocean here. So different type of like comfort with liability there for their outdoor classes. Yeah. Marianne, Paul, anything you want to share here?
Well, this was our first day, so it was really nice to have a land day, after a long flight. We got in pretty late the night before. And so I was super grateful to not have to get in a boat and paddle somewhere on that day. It was, kind of like you just feel jet lagged and you need a day to kind of recoup. And it was a great way to do it, was just to get out and hike around and see the beautiful scenery. And unfortunately, because we spent so much time in the water, I felt like I didn't really see the land part of Wales. I just saw the ocean part of Wales. So this was the one kind of day where I had a chance to kind of be on land. So it was kind of nice.
Oh, yeah. All right. Cool. Paul, do you want to take this one?
All right.
Yeah.
So this was our first paddle. So we had 5 different trips, each day of our time there. And one of the things that I remember asking Kelly, one of our pre-planning meetings, is like what to expect, or what kinds of things should we work on for paddling to prepare ourselves for whales. And the first thing she said was wind. And I kind of was like, crap, I hate wind. But it was true, because the first day we were there, it was basically probably the windiest day that we had over that the week of being in Wales. And literally, like, I can describe like being at the outdoors place in my room and just hearing, like, feeling the house shake. The wind is so strong, and it blew my door open in the middle of the night. And then I turned the lights on and I looked, and the floor, the linoleum floor, was literally like a wind wave was blowing through the floor because it got under the linoleum. So it was pretty intense, and I was kind of worried, like, this is not when you should go kayaking. So we started off like every day, kind of sitting at the table and looking at charts and planning, sort of looking at the conditions, the wind and the currents, and making decisions about where we should paddle. And a lot of times, Kelly and Nick and Laura would actually make the call that morning because they'd go drive around and check it out, because everything's so fairly close, and just see what it looks like. On this day, though, I think it was pretty clear because of the winds were kind of coming from the west and kind of just hitting the whole coastline on the western side of Anglesey, that it kind of made it impossible to do any trips along there. And so the best trip they thought for those conditions was to go through the Menai Strait, which is that narrow channel between the island and the mainland, and it cuts through, basically separates Anglesey from the mainland of Wales, North Wales. So yeah, we had 25 knot winds blowing from the west, kind of southwest, I think, and gusts of 40 knots. And I think that was pretty accurate. And the plan was to paddle from sort of the one side, basically from the west side, and paddle sort of northeast through the Menai Strait, from the town of Carnarvon, and end up on sort of Menai Bridge. So you'll see that's the route that we took, that's marked by red. It was about 8.5 miles. We had not only the wind, but also the flood tide pushing us through there. So not only was it a downwinder, but it was also with the current. So everything was kind of set up nicely. The wind was strong. So even being like a downwinder still means you gotta, navigate your boat and, get through that as best as possible. So yeah, go ahead, next slide. Okay, so one thing first off was, you notice we have a lot of red boats. It was like everybody had a red boat, but I think Matthias had a yellow boat. He was always easy to find. But and the other kind of interesting challenge of trips like this is you don't necessarily going to be in a boat that you've ever been in before or comfortable being in. So I ended up getting a boat I've never paddled in. It was a Valley Serona. Marianne also had that boat, but she didn't have my Serona. So I actually really was uncomfortable in this boat initially. It felt kind of unstable to me, and it really was weathercocking in the wind a lot. And so it was kind of unnerving to have to be in conditions and then also be in a strange boat and to figure that out. So first part of this trip was trying to kind of get acclimated to your boat. And so that's kind of that kind of happened in the first hour or so. We played around, and the other cool thing was the put-in was at a castle. The Carnarvon Castle is the one you see up on top there, and it's a very cool looking castle. It was, I think, built in like 1300s by King Edward I. And one interesting fact about Wales is it has the most castles of anywhere in the UK. Apparently over 500 castles. A lot of them built by King Edward. So he built this one sort of in the Welsh stronghold. And Carnarvon is, I guess, that area is like the highest Welsh speaking population in Wales. So it's pretty traditional. The castle is still used. There's people, I think, like shops in there. We didn't go inside of it, but it's still utilized. and it's very beautiful right on the water there. So so yeah, we paddled from there and kind of got out into the current, and off we went. And seriously, we covered some ground really quickly. Another cool spot was this mansion further down Menai Strait called Place Nuith. So the only one thing I remember about Welsh language is when you see two D's, it's pronounced TH. So that's Place Nuith. The Welsh language is extremely difficult to read or speak. So that's as far as I got. But that was kind of a cool place. A lot of history there that I won't get into, but Laura had some great stories about who's lived there. And she was the Wikipedia expert on our trip, telling us everything that we passed by. Okay, next slide. So saw some interesting things along the way, including this structure up on the left called, it was a fish weir. So they build this wall right in sort of attached to an island where during an ebb tide the water would essentially push fish in there and they get trapped. And so that was how they would capture fish in nets, I guess. And that area had nets, the walls had nets, so the water could pass through, but the fish wouldn't. So that was kind of cool. We stopped for lunch in a really nice little town in a park. And this is where we all took out our storm kegs, which became a theme, as you'll see later on the other days. And we just decided to see where that, tried different poses and you know, kind of show off our orangeness. So it was cool. It was a fun group. It's nice, you know, I have to say it was really fun to know people in the group because I've paddled with a bunch of them before the trip. And then also there were a few people I hadn't met, but chemistry was great, and it was really a fun group to be with. So I was appreciating that. And then the trip kind of ends at the Menai Bridge in an area called the Swellies, and which is one of my favorite words from this trip. And Marianne would really wants me to say, "Is your ocean swelly?" Because it is definitely. This was a cool spot. It's sort of where Menai Strait gets really narrow and shallow. So naturally, then the waves form during sort of a strong current. And so maybe you can play that video, Laura.
All right, say a prayer for me.
Oh yeah.
Ooh.
It kind of seemed like it was a little slow motion, but it was really, I swear, like from that place we got to that bridge in like a minute. That water was moving so fast, and we were just basically surfing waves all the way through it, and it was really fun. It was a great way to end the day because like that was sort of the final kind of stretch of the river that we did. And then when we got to the bridge, I think this is what happened, but I think the current had actually shifted. So it started to be an ebb tide. And so now the water is actually going in the other direction. And so as we passed the bridge, we are now going up current. And so we kind of used that to play around and do some ferrying and peel outs and things like that under the bridge. And had sort of fun at the end of the trip. And then, of course, like all our days, a great day of paddling culminated in a fun stop to the pub for refreshments and dinner and stories. And that was our first day. I'll pass it on to who's doing the second one.
I'm next.
Okay.
Day
Oh, you
two.
remember? You remember so much. Your pronunciation's good. All right.
So by day two, the whole group was pretty tired of Paul and I singing My Sirona and and repeating "Is your ocean swelly" in a horrible accent over and over again. But day two was a great day. So we launched, and there's so many consonants, and I'm probably going to mispronounce everything, but we launched from Porth Dafart, which is, if you look at that map that's on the right side of the Holy Island, you see like a road where there's kind of a T. There's a little kind of like beach inlet right there. You can see where we launched from on the track below, which I think is Matthias's. So that's our launch spot. And the picture on the left there with the very dramatic sky and the amazing rock wall is the launch. And there's just an incredible beach. And this was along where we could walk to this really easily from where we were staying at Anglesey Outdoors. So just like an incredible put in. And then the goal for the day was to get, I think we were trying to get to South Stack. So if you go from there and you look, you're going to go clockwise around Holy Island. You'll see Penguin Mars, that first headland, and then South Stack is the second headland that has the little marker on it. And the goal was, I think, to use the flood to try to get to South Stack. We didn't get to South Stack. There's good reason why. And you could go to the second, and South Stack is that second photo. There's that little lighthouse on it. That's in the distance where we didn't end up going. You go to the next slide, Laura, please.
And as weird as it is, I think it's Port Davak.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. All right, so there's the launch spot on the left. We're doing some calisthenics. The reason that we didn't get to South Stack is probably twofold. So one is like, one of the coolest parts of the trip is that you're seeing like whales from the water, right? Like I've been to Ireland and some other places where you're like always up on the cliffs looking down, kind of wondering what it's like to be down there. And this was like 5 days of being at the bottom of the cliffs looking up and wondering what was up on land. So it was really like taking in that whole experience. And then the second reason is it was an entire group that was very excited about rock hopping, not rock gardening, rock hopping. And as you can see, that's Lisa Shapiro on the right. You can see her stern in the air. She definitely did the most, I think, acrobatics in her boat on this trip for whatever reason. She got some good ocean energy. And then there's Kelly on the bottom, me, and then I think Matthias and Kelly there on the right. So we basically made our way around the headlands, kind of ducking in and out of nooks and crannies. And rock hopping in Wales is a little different than rock gardening here. Kelly was like, we had a whole talk about it before we got on the water. Most of the rocks sort of stick up like this. So from the get-go, Kelly was like, we are not, unless it's an accident, we're not intentionally doing pour overs. Like we are, because if the swell drops you basically land and you can pretty easily mess up a boat. But the good news is there's tons and tons and tons of slots and features and just ways to kind of make your way in and around rocks without doing pour overs. And so that's what we pretty much spent the entire morning doing. It was really fun. You go to the next slide, Laura.
Can I chime in with something?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I want to also prime folks, so like a big like asterisk over this presentation. We had very uncharacteristic swell during this week. And so it's like abnormal, like maybe once in every 2 years that swell like this can make its way up the Irish Sea and be felt on this side of Anglesey. In Pembrokeshire and different side of Wales, they're more exposed to swell, but super rare that it would wrap around this way. Okay, just wanted to add that so people don't go there expecting a lot of rock hopping.
Right. Yeah, we're like, oh, can we surf? And Kelly's like, not that kind. That's why tide races are so important, right? So here's a couple more photos of just us making our way around towards South Stack. And then I think we wanted to be back to Penryn Mawr, which is the famous tide race. That was that first headland that you saw on the map at a certain point in time. I think it was like right after Max flood. And so we made this stop at this really cool beach. That was not a beach. It was a ton of rocks with more smaller rocks. So that was fun to get everybody in and out of there. But it was a very neat lunch spot, and we had South Stack in the background. And this is a photo of all of us doing our best impression of a starfish. All right, you could head to the next slide, please, Laura. Okay, so then we made our way to Penryn Mawr, and here's a couple of cool graphics I found. They're from different positions. So the first one's kind of the aerial view, and then you have to put yourself at the top of the race, and you're looking, you're basically looking in the direction of flow for that second image. So Penryn Mawr only works on the flood and not the ebb. And it's interesting because the headlands all have their own very specific dynamics, and some work both directions and some only work one. And so there's all this local knowledge of, you know, basically when our tide race is going to develop and what the optimal conditions are. And so we were there on the flood. Our particular timing, we were not there on a spring tide. We were there on a neap. So we, and I did look it up. Penryn Mawr can go up to 7 knots max on a spring, and the max on a neap is about 4 knots. And I think it was, ask Kelly again, it was about 3 when we were there. And we didn't have a ton of wind against current, I think, that particular day, but maybe just a little bit. So we ended up moseying around the race, and it was just an absolute blast. We spent a lot of time kind of like warming up, I think on some of the inner, like the smaller channels, and then making our way over to the main channel and kind of like ducking into the eddy, and then surfing our butts off. So you could head to the next slide, Laura. And then here's a few photos, kind of like Yellow Bluff, top of the race. It was a lot more organized. So we were trying to hang out up there a lot, and the waves get pretty organized. There are 2, I think, submerged rocks called the Fangs that were off on the right side. I don't think there's any photos of them, but every once in a while, it'd just be like enormous waves building over those 2 that were just incredible. And then the back of the race was a little bit less organized and more chaotic. So you can kind of like float back and have a different kind of fun back there, but just really, really fun. Like you could, and this was not on a spring tide, right? So we were having a blast and enjoying ourselves a ton. So that was Penryn Mawr. And then take a good look at these photos, because Penryn Mawr is going to come back, and it's going to look different in a day or 2. All right. Go ahead, Laura. Thanks. And then so day 3 was a stormy day. And as you're probably going to see from our photos, is a good place to have a storm keg. So this was our storm paddle. We launched from, Laura, you can correct my pronunciation, but I think it's Kamis? Oh dear. All right. So from that bay, and that bay is down, if you look at the little track, it's where the parking lot is. So we launched from there. And then we made our way over kind of to that second bay. That photo is from the second bay. And we did, it was really fun. We spent a while in there just getting used to the wind, and Laura and Kelly were kind of doing some guided discovery about just boat control and wind, and just getting comfortable with that, and, you know, best ways to turn upwind and best ways to turn downwind, and kind of getting our wind legs. And then what we ended up doing is, you see that point sticking out, kind of that second point, is we started to really play with upwinders and downwinders. And the wind was blowing basically from, I think it's east-northeast. So like basically right in the direction we were going. So the upwinder was a headwind. You could go to the next slide, Laura. So, so that first photo is us sitting basically right at the headland. And then what we were doing is going upwind with a lot of swell energy. So that was Paul's face. And so the photo on the right is us going upwind, and then this video is us going downwind. And at that point, the wind and the current had started to oppose each other. And so it kept getting bigger and bigger. And it was incredible. It got to the point where as we were surfing, the ground swell, like the bigger swells were moving so fast that you almost couldn't catch those, but there were waves within the swell. And so if you timed it right on the downwinder, you could catch a wave to catch and use the energy to catch another wave, and then basically like surf the huge ground swell. Just an absolute blast. And again, we had like plans to go further that day, and then it didn't even end up doing it because we were doing tons and tons of upwind, downwind, just in small circles, and then did a much bigger paddle upwind and got back like within, maybe it was like half an hour upwind and then 5 minutes back or something. Just incredible. And Paul's face there says it all. You can go to the next slide, Laura.
Yeah, some people were actually trying not to surf those monster waves. Marianne has her own approach, but I was kind of backpedaling. I was a little afraid, like it's just gonna, send me somewhere I don't want to go.
I think even over the wind, you could hear Marianne's like hooting and hollering.
It was so much fun. So then we had lunch on the beach there, and one of the cool things is we did have time to get out of our boats and see something. So we walked up, and this church is the Church of St. Patrick. It was presumably founded by him in 440 AD at a spot where he shipwrecked. And because always good to paddle where people are shipwrecking. That's like really good principle. And then he shipwrecked, and then he stayed in a cave that's like on the cliffs, and there's a spring there, and you can see where it was. So we got to walk up to the church, and it was open. So we went in and spent some time in our storm kayaks, and then you can see us there in the distance. This is there's another tide race. I don't think we were technically in the main tide race when we were paddling where that video was, but there is another tide race here, and the island's called Middle Mouse. That's I always call it Modest Mouse, but it's Middle Mouse. And then the tide race forms there between kind of that the mainland that point and Middle Mouse island, the island there. So lots and lots of tide races. It's like a Disneyland of tide races. Anything y'all want to add to that?
I think this is a cool thing. Since folks seem to be interested in Welsh language and pronunciation, the name of this church is Llan Patrick. I'm probably butchering that, but the double L sound is a really unique sound to Welsh, and it's like Llan. It's like you have to put your tongue on the top of your mouth behind your teeth and kind of like hiss it out almost through your tongue. And that means parish. So this is St. Patrick's Parish. And St. Patrick of St. Patrick's Day fame, of course, associated with Ireland, but he's actually Welsh. And there's a long story of him being captured by Irish pirates and brought to Ireland. And this was his return to Wales, his homeland. So it's just mind-boggling. This happened apparently in 400 AD. So wild. That's all I wanted to add.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura.
Oh, I think there's a question about defining tide races.
Oh, it's essentially a spot where current is transformed, right? So, and it can be transformed in a bunch of different ways. In Yellow Bluff, for example, in the bay, we've got a headland and a constriction coming up. And so what ends up happening is the current gets squished a couple directions, and then you have waves that form. Here, I think for most of these headlands, it's mostly the constriction. It's probably pushing up a little bit, but really pushing from one side. But what ends up happening is the current no longer is just current, right? You end up with it kind of coming back on itself and waves forming. So the current alone can lead to a tide race, but in a lot of the cases, on the days that we were surfing, we had wind against current, and then that whips up the waves even more. So it becomes this incredible playground for sea kayakers to be able to surf. And I think one of the coolest things is you've got current essentially going against you, and you're moving upstream because the waves are allowing you to move against, 3 or 4 knots of current, which would be really hard to paddle against, but you've got forward momentum. Does that answer the question?
Awesome.
All right, should I relate this day? So our 4th day, our trip was to start on sort of the north part of Anglesey, where you see on the map on the right, the green little arrow thing. That's Soldier's Point. And then the idea was we would paddle all the way around the 2 stacks, the north stack, which is the point on the north part, and the south stack labeled on the left side, all the way down to that the beach where we put in near our near the recreational place where we stayed, and that was where we were going to take out. So we were going to have a pickup. A van was going to wait for us there, and so I think the distance was about 6 miles. And we were the plan was to follow the ebb tide, kind of push us south around the points, and then essentially take us all. We would pretty much be sort of back to where we wanted to put out before the flood would start picking up. So that was the plan. I would say this, there were kind of, in my perspective, I guess maybe for everybody, there were kind of two different types of trip here on this day. There was kind of a very nice, smooth, relaxing paddle, enjoying the scenery, and then lunch, and then everything, in my opinion, hell breaking loose, and very stressful situations. So I will try to relate that experience to you guys as I had experienced it. So let's go next slide.
Ready.
So the first part of the paddle, when we're going along the stacks, and I mean, it's just amazing. The cliffs were just so sheer, and the rock formations were so amazing. It was just spectacular scenery. I mean, and that's someone who's been, along the California coast and seen some amazing things. This was like very bigger scale, and the colors and the type of rocks. I mean, I wish I had a geologist that could have been with us and explain everything, because there was so much going on. And it was, and as Laura was saying about the swell, I think this was the day where I first kind of saw the swell or experienced the swell. It was a little bit noticeable, because like when you're paddling along the cliffs, you all of a sudden there was this energy surge that wasn't there on the days before. But it wasn't a big deal. It was just a small swell from our standards, from being in California, but it was definitely noticeable, bigger than it was before. And so it was kind of an easy, nice paddle. You can go on to the next slide. We had a couple places where there was some slots between the island and the main part of the mainland, where it was kind of fun with the swell going in there. And I think the picture on the left, that's Lisa. And I remember she got hit by a wave, and I think she went over, and I think she did 6 or 7 attempts to roll. She just didn't give up, and she finally made it. And I was just like amazed at her tenacity, and her ability to keep going. Cause like, I was like, oh, she's done. And she just found her way to finally get that roll. And that was awesome. So, the cliffs were just like, as you can see, just vertical. The one in the middle, there was actually some rock climbers that were going up that. I guess what they do is they rappel down from the top, and then they climb back up. So there were some climbers that were doing that. And then, as Laura said, there's a lot of coasteering that goes on where people jump off the cliffs and then climb back up and then swim to another location. That sounds really fun. I think this was a little big for that, but some areas around there, I think a lot of people do that on the coastlines here. So this was definitely like the first part of the day was super chill. You know, the current was pushing us along. We just kind of paddled. It was like very scenic, and I think everybody was relaxed. And you can go on to the next slide. And then we kind of stopped for lunch at this really nice beach, and just kind of people took naps. And you know, one thing I have to say, on day 4, you do start, at least I was starting to feel tired. I could tell my body was tired, and so I was kind of appreciating like kind of how chill the day was. Here's great pictures of Kelly and Laura, who I have to say were awesome, and some of the best guiding I've ever had on a trip before. And they both had, you know, different skills and different personalities, and they were together were a great team. So I felt really lucky that I was part of that trip. So we decided to, Penryn Mawr is essentially straight out from this cove. So we decided to go out there and just play around a little bit before heading down to the beach where our takeout was. This was late afternoon. And so we kind of went out to the cove, and we got out to Penryn Mawr, and you know, the flood tide is now picking up. And essentially when we got out there, we were going kind of with the flood past some of the kind of the rocky formations, and then out into the tide race, where we did some runs. You know, we weren't planning to be there very long. I think we were planning just to do like, you know, half an hour of play and then get back. And we did that. And then as we were trying to get back, we realized that it was actually a lot harder than we thought, because the flood was really strong. And on top of that, the swell was actually really noticeable and affecting the wave energy in the tide race. So we were trying to do an attainment to get past Penryn Mawr, to get out of that kind of middle section. And basically there was only room enough for one kind of kayaker to go at a time. And so the rest of us had to sit behind a rock in an eddy and wait until one person got through. But that route was really challenging because, like I said, the swell would kind of hit you as you were hitting the tide race. And so there were a lot of different wave dynamics hitting you from the side, hitting you from the front. There was rocks that you had to avoid. And so it became really challenging. And for me, I think I felt a little trapped. There was no other way out other than this one location, and started playing, you know, kind of got to me mentally, and I was just really wanting to get out of there. And I tried 3 times and was unable to get through it. The last attempt, I thought I got through it, but then a swell hit me, knocked me over, and I went over again. I couldn't roll, and I ended up back in that eddy again. And we were probably in that eddy for an hour. And eventually, I just kind of threw in the towel, and I didn't know. But then Kelly kind of said, "Well, there is another way." And that is to paddle back to where we started, which was 6 miles back to the put-in. And I'm like, I just want out of here. And there was 2 of us who weren't able to get out, and that was the option we chose. And I was fine with it. I was like, just get me out of here. And it was actually a really nice trip back. It was with the current, you know, the flood tide pushed us all the way. It was beautiful. And it was a lot better than being in that spot. So it was a lesson for me that, you know, things can change quickly. And you know, I definitely, I felt like I was strong enough to get through it, but it was a kind of a mental thing for me. And it's interesting to know like how to deal with those situations when you're, you know, mentally kind of in a bad space. So you want to show the video to kind of get an experience of the tide race that day?
Yeah, definitely. All right. I'm gonna set it up, and I'm hoping I can do this.
You have to do the YouTube, right?
Yeah, it's I didn't embed my videos. I like how you did that, Paul. All
They don't
right.
play very well though.
Oh, okay. Here I go. Thank you all for your patience here. Okay. And I'm gonna maximize it. Can you guys see it all maximized now? All right, here we go. Oh no, I might have to lower the quality. Let's see.
She made it look easy.
All right. I'm going back into the PowerPoint. All right, getting better.
I guess we only got like 13 minutes, so we should probably.
Yeah.
Final
Okay. Oh, thank you for sharing that, Paul. I think what's really interesting and that I still wonder about that day is how you and others would have approached it, knowing that going back the way we came from was an option all along. Because I think you touched on such an important thing, like the mental game when you're challenging yourself and things like this, and just knowing that there's like a back door or a way out, and like how that kind of ameliorates that tension that can lead to, you know, more and more escalating of anxiety. So yeah, I think thank you for sharing that. Okay. All right. Bull Bay to Camayas. So this one was a super fun. I think this was our final day. Yes. And it was just a super short, super cruisy. We were all tired, especially from yesterday. The conditions were lovely. Like there wasn't a ton of wind. We had done lots of paddling in the wind. And it was kind of like we were handed this softball where we just went out and we had all of these things, these conditions that seemed to be things that we brought from California, right? So we had weirdly like surf. We had, for the region, as Paul mentioned, like uncharacteristically long period swell. And so, you know, here we were expecting that tide races were like the main menu item, but then all of a sudden we were handed a day that was very filled with rock hopping and rock gardening. So we got to do a lot of playing with the swell. As Marianne mentioned, when you rock garden here, you have to be very careful. Scraping is definitely not ideal. So a lot of the features were more of like slots and surfing through slots and like boat control when you have lots of movement of swell, but trying to avoid those high and dry situations to save the boat and save the hulls. So here's a little bit more of what we experienced. So a lot of really cool caverns. There's Marianne enjoying a little elevator ride. And then you'll see in the background here, and we'll touch on this more, there's an old abandoned kiln for drying and making bricks. And so, is that right? I think that's what that one is. There's a ton of mineral resources on Wales, and that's why it was such a strategic stronghold for so long for a lot of the English kings, is because there were ancient copper mines and modern copper mines, and tin manufacturing was super huge, or mining was huge in Wales. So you have all these vestiges of when it was this natural resource hub that fueled the British Empire. And this is one of those, but it was abandoned a long time ago, but the ruins are pretty cryptic and fun to play around. And we did a full Kokatat Storm Cag photo shoot amongst the ruins for your enjoyment. So anything you want to add, Marianne and Paul? We're near.
Just the fun times like that were great.
Oh yeah. I think, just your typical band photo.
Yeah.
I guess just one thing, which is that part of this included the crazy swell that we had paddled through before. And it was just like a totally different place. You're in the exact same spot and you're like, wow.
Yeah.
It just changes day to day so much.
Yeah.
Oh, I think this one's me. I have the pub slide.
The pub slide.
This is a slide to acknowledge that the classics do not just include classic paddling locations. They also include the classic pubs. And that first photo is the northernmost pub in Wales, I believe. We've got Paul with a candlestick. And then every pub just seemed to have its own collection of something, paddling, T-shirts here. We got a collection of awls and then a tiny miniature outboard motor collection. So just really fun. Lots of social activity. That's all.
Yeah. And so this is one of our final slides too, for folks who are wanting to drop off. So we'd like to share some of our observations, each of us, from the trip. I think for me, the big observation is just the tidal power of the Irish Sea. It's just mind-boggling. Like, my mind can't still, I know I say mind-boggling, but it's no, hyperbole. It's like I can't comprehend the tide and the tidal resonance of these coastlines here. Like, I was further south in Cornwall for a surf kayaking competition, and there were heats where we had to pause because the coach or the judges couldn't see the surfers because the tide had gone too far out, and they even had binoculars and they couldn't see the competitors. If that gives you an idea of this massive, powerful exchange. So here, where we have tidal exchanges, but not on that scale, and they're not funneled around headlands in the same way. And so it's just super awe-inspiring to be in a place where the main dynamic is one that's a little bit foreign to you. Because here I feel very surf and rock gardening focused, but there, tide races all the time, main event. And then the other observation, of course, is like come through. It's just like the history is just so compelling and fascinating. And, Wales was such a Celtic holdout for the Roman Empire for a long time. And it's really neat to be in a place that has maintained that heritage. That's like a unique identity that's very, just Welsh. And to see that modernized is really neat as well, for them to maintain. And continue to make it like a contemporary culture, not just like once we spoke Welsh. So
I guess for me, I mean, just it was amazing to me that to find out that they don't have swell, other than 4 times a year. And lucky us, we got to experience it. But I mean, and the swell is not really even comparable to what we see, but the conditions there are driven by other factors, like the wind is just so powerful. And that third day, of just seeing those giant rollers coming at us, and it was all just because of the wind. Because the day after it was flat, and the day before it was flat, but then the wind picked up, and then just all of a sudden the waves were just enormous. So it's so dynamic and changing, and I guess the cool thing about Anglesey, I don't know if we've said this, but the fact that it's an island and you basically have 360 degrees of coastline, that allows you to make plans according to the conditions. So you can essentially go to one side of the island or the other, depending on where the wind's blowing or where the tidal exchanges are. So that, I mean, Kelly was saying you can paddle every day because there's somewhere where you can go, which I think is so cool. And maybe that's why it's the kayaker destination. And then I really did love the rocks. I thought those cliffs and the geology was just incredible, and love to learn more about that. That's all.
So I had kind of a similar observation on the forecasting and trip planning, which is just like how cool it is. You can drive like anywhere on Anglesey, right? And so depending on what you're looking for, you're like, well, I want wind against current, so I'm going to go here. I don't want wind against current, so I'm going to go somewhere else. Just like the options available, but also like the flip of that is how adaptable you have to be. And I was talking a lot with Nick and Kelly about when they're leading trips, just how does that work? Because they said they'll often like set a meeting spot and be like, absolutely no one suit up. Don't take your boats off the car because we have to get there, right? And see if it'll even work like when we arrive, and then have like a second, third, and like fourth plan. So that kind of like adaptability along with like the dynamism of the conditions, it just seems like part of the sea kayaking culture. And then my second sort of takeaway was just how ingrained sea kayaking is in like the culture. You're driving around and the cars on the freeway have sea kayaks on their racks, right? I mean, we see that a little bit, but you're like, oh, I must know that person, right? If you're on 80. And you usually do, but there it just seems like tons of sea kayaks. We met a lot of folks at Anglesey Outdoors who had come from other parts of Europe, Sweden, elsewhere, to train and to paddle and like just really like practice in conditions. And so that was a really neat experience, just to kind of, I don't know, just be able to like associate with, you're in one kitchen and there's, people from 5 different parts of the world who are sea kayakers, just like telling stories and talking. That was really neat. And then also the dry room. Definitely we need more dry rooms here. And like 2 hours and your stuff is dry, just incredible. And I don't know why this isn't more prevalent, especially in a place where we have fog. So plug for dry rooms.
Oh, yeah. And before, this is our final slide, but I also want to mention, it seems like folks have asked me about, another trip to Wales. Cali Collective doesn't have another one planned in the foreseeable future, but that should not stop you at all from going to Wales. Kelly and Nick welcome folks from all over the world all the time, and they offer a range of different events and opportunities depending on your skill level. So don't think that you have to be super advanced to go and enjoy it. You could just be exploring sea kayaking or an intermediate beginner and just get so much out of it for the same reasons that Paul and Marianne touched on. There's just, in any given day, there's so many options from mild to spicy. So if you're interested, their website is Flow State Adventures. And I also really hazard folks, especially if you're like, oh, I'll just go on my own and figure it out. This is not one of those places where you can do that. So one huge asterisk is there are a lot of ways to get yourself in trouble really quickly on this coastline. And it's really hard unless you're a local who has spent serious time there or have trained there to understand the nuances of these races, access, what the conditions are doing. So for your first time, highly recommend going with a guide or a coach. And you're also in luck because, as Kelly likes to say, you can't go anywhere on Anglesey and throw a rock without hitting a sea kayaking coach. So I just wanted to add those 2 cents there. So, but Marianne and Paul, on to you guys. You can field some questions for folks who have lingered, or if there's anything else you want to chime in on.
Tom has a question about the dry room in the chat. So the dry room it also has the laundry, but it's like an entire room that has the heat just on full blast 24/7, and then lines to hang things everywhere. And so in the morning, there's nothing hanging, and you're like, wow, it's so much room in here. And by the end, it's a sea of dry suits and booties and stinky underlayers. But like within 2 hours, basically your stuff is dry. Like, you can hang your laundry in there. You actually have to take your dry suit out because it will fry your gaskets if you leave it for too long. But just high intensity heat is just incredible. Any other questions?
And one thing, if you do have a sauna or access to a sauna, it's definitely not as hot as a sauna. So please don't put your dry suit in a sauna. The cat could spend all day in there and not get injured. So that just tells you it's not as hot as a sauna.
So I have a question. You said this trip was in October, right? How different are the conditions in October compared to, say, the middle of the summer? Is it like California where it can be night and day, or is it different like that every day of the year and you never know what you're going to get?
I can kick this off if that works for y'all, because we were originally planning this trip for July, and then based on the folks who were interested, we just did an internal call to folks who had signaled that they were interested, and everyone seemed to be a little bit more advanced of a paddler who was interested. And so July is typically when it's going to be a little bit more mellow. They don't have as much wind. They still have tidal exchanges all year round, and you can plan around the neaps in the springs, but October and through the winter, you tend to get more storms, more swell, more wind. Everything just kind of amps up, kind of like here. So it was a way that we can guarantee more conditions by pushing it later into the year, into the fall.
The other thing that we were told was that there's big differences between what they call neap tide and spring tide, and I think we were there, so that just refers to the 2 different tidal cycles in a month, and one is stronger than the other when there's a full moon. But that makes a huge difference on the tidal exchange at Wales. Like, it literally doubles the amount of tidal exchange. So the currents and the tide races are really going off during one of those tides. I just don't remember which one. Spring tide, I think.
Probably spring.
Yeah. So we were there on the smaller one, thankfully. But he said if you come back and you go on the fuller tide, the currents and the waves are even bigger, and that's just on a monthly cycle.
Yeah, that was a fantastic presentation. I don't know if you guys can see all the comments in the chat, but everybody is pretty much blown away by all the paddling, the conditions, the history. It just, everybody now wants to go. So thank you guys for putting this together, and really great presentation. And Paul, I think I have to thank you especially, because all of us kayakers have been in those situations where you realize most of sea kayaking is a mental game. And, we've all been in those situations where it's just, oh, am I going to get out of this? So it was really good to share that so everybody knows what that's like. So great presentation. Thank you guys. It was fantastic.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for listening. It was
Yeah,
fun to
definitely.
relive the story.
Mhm.
Yeah. So who's going back?
I want to go back for sure.
Spring. Spring tides in the spring.
So one thing I would say, what I want to work on skill-wise to get ready for tide races is river kayaking. I really want to work on just that, how to control a boat in current like that, because I think that would have really helped me feel a lot more comfortable in a tide race. So just to share that little bit for you, because we get some tide race experience, but nothing like that. Like Yellow Bluff, is its own thing, but it's just not to the same scale as what you see in Wales.
Great, fantastic. Wow, I'm inspired. I used to subscribe to one of the British ocean, I think it was called Ocean Paddler or something, Ocean Sea Kayaking magazine, filled with all these beautiful glossies of Penryn Mawr, and yeah, so it really came alive with your presentation though. And how cool to be paddling, driving around and see sea kayaks everywhere. That's just, wow.
It's like a whole island of Horseshoe Cove, Coast Guard.
But did you see a lot of kayakers on the water other than you?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's nice too. I've been on so many trips where there's no kayakers to be found except us, so fun. All right, great. No last questions then. Thank you guys very much for putting this together. It was superb. I'm inspired.